Welcome to Pod of Jake, a podcast hosted by Jake. You can go to zerofjake.com to learn more about Jake and everything that he does, and feel free to email him anytime at jake@blogofjake.com or message him at zerofjake on Twitter or at Jake on Warpcast. Anyway, we thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, please consider giving Pod of Jake a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate your support.
Thank you, Joshua, for joining me on the podcast today. I really appreciate you taking the time. You are the founder and CEO of a company called DoNotPay. It's basically AI-powered software, sort of like a robot lawyer to help people save time and money. Overall, it started as helping people to sort of save money on parking tickets, which was a personal problem for you. And the company kind of came together almost by accident, just by you solving your own problems and helping friends and family to do the same. And everything kind of developed from there. So great to have you on the podcast. Really excited for the conversation. For those who don't know you, I think the best place to start would be if you could tell your story from, as early as you're willing to start to where you are today and talk through some of the decisions you made along the way.
Thank you so much for having me. So I grew up in London in England, and I started coding at about age 12. And this was before the days of Code Academy, or I guess ChatGPT can now teach you to code. And so I taught myself using Stanford YouTube videos. And I thought, if this is what the YouTube videos are like, one could only imagine what it's like to go there. And so I applied from the UK, and it was a dream come true to go from London to Stanford. When I arrived in Silicon Valley, I'll use the excuse that everyone drives on the other side of the road in America. But both in the UK and in America, I was a terrible driver and got a huge number of parking tickets. And I was always fascinated by the law. My father's a human rights activist fighting against the Russian mafia, and I've always looked for ways to beat systems, and I couldn't afford to pay these expensive tickets. And so I began to research all of the obscure parking laws and the ways that people can get out of tickets. And what I learned is remarkable, which is if you know the right things to say, oftentimes the government don't follow their own rules in issuing the tickets. So, for example, they will have a tree covering the sign, or they will say the car is blue when it's red, and all of these things. And this allows you to get your ticket dismissed. And so I started having a lot of success with my own parking tickets, and a rumor spread among my family and friends that I could help them get out of tickets. And everyone started coming out of the woodwork asking for my help. I'd have people that I hadn't spoken to in years. They would text me and say, "Can you help me with this ticket?" And I was just a freshman at Stanford at this point, and I was busy studying for classes, and I didn't have time to help all these people. And so I thought it would be a really cool thing to build an app that automatically gets you out of your tickets. And I just did this as a side project, and I called it DoNotPay. And I expected maybe 20 people to use it, all of the people that were messaging me. But one of them is actually a blogger, and she wrote a blog about it, and it went viral on Reddit, and it went all the way to the front page. And I went from about 10 cases in the first few days to tens of thousands of cases in the first few weeks. And I didn't intend to make this a business or even a popular website. And I was just inundated with demand and usage. And I realized that this is bigger than just me and my friends. It turns out everyone is being ripped off and by these governments. And I had a contact form on my website, and it said, if you need any help, contact this email. And I don't think people really realized that there was a college dorm room student behind this, and they thought it was an established law firm or something like that. And so they began to write in with all other problems that they were having. People were saying, "I've been ripped off by Comcast," or my magazine, they keep charging me for my magazine subscription or my gym subscription. What can you do? And this, from the beginning, gave me the idea that this idea is bigger than just tickets. And so I spent the past 9 years building out DoNotPay.com to be a sort of AI consumer champion to help to use the most powerful technology available to help people fight back. And now we have over 200 use cases that help people with a whole variety of things. And we're increasingly using more and more AI to help people fight back.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I appreciate you sharing it. One of the takeaways I've had, I think, from doing 170 something episodes of the podcast now, talking to a lot of great founders and entrepreneurs, is that almost always the founder or CEO of a great company didn't really like set out to do the thing that they ended up doing directly. They just kind of followed their interests or built something for themselves, and then one thing led to the next. The next thing you know, they're running this big company. And it sounds like that was like very much the case for you. But I'm curious, like going back to, growing up or your time at Stanford, did you have like an entrepreneurial bug? Did you have this desire to build things or one day be able to build like a big, great company? Or is it truly something that you just fell into?
It was less about entrepreneurialism and more about being able to build what you want without having to ask anyone's permission. That's the most amazing thing about coding and computer science. In typical jobs, you have to work your way up the chain to build something. But with software, you can build it. And if it's useful, it can scale to as many people as it works for. And that is something I've always loved.
Do you remember when you started learning how to code? I think you said you were 14 watching YouTube videos from Stanford where you ended up going to school. Do you remember like what it was that inspired you to learn to code in the first place, or if there was a particular reason for that?
Yes, so like most people, I jailbroke my iPhone because the iPhone was useless when I was between 12 and 14. It didn't do as many things as it did now, and I wanted to make it more useful. And so I jailbroke my phone, and then you go down this whole rabbit hole where um, you want to build themes for the phone to change the icons. And then I started selling themes on Cydia, which I wish continued to exist. And then I started building apps on Cydia to sell and make some money. And then my first kind of non-jailbreaking software idea was there's a sandwich chain in America, in the UK called Pret a Manger. They have a few locations in New York and Chicago, but really it's across the UK. It's like Starbucks of the UK. And this was back in the day when if you made an iPhone app, it was actually very innovative. And they didn't have an iPhone app at the time. And so I built the iPhone app for Pret a Manger. And given the theme of this conversation being very anti-authority, I just used all of their graphics, all of their logos to build this iPhone app, and I launched it on the App Store. And Apple have a form, and you have to certify that you have the copyright for everything. I just tick those boxes. And the app was incredibly popular because people thought it was the official Pret a Manger app. And Pret a Manger actually reached out and they said, we want to actually make this the official app. So even though I started with all this copyright infringement, I created the official Pret a Manger app, and I would say that was my first successful software application.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've had this long-standing like appeal to things, being able to build things permissionlessly, and like that very much qualifies. But it's also an interesting route to like you built this app for this real company, this big company that people could think of as like the Starbucks of America, and then they actually liked it so much that they wanted to make it the official app. And it's like at that point, the people who would get mad at you about the copyright infringement would be the company that ultimately is like, great job with the app. We want to make this the official app. So you can actually go and sort of permissionlessly do these things. And if you do them well, maybe there's hope that all of the sort of, red tape that you break along the way is sort of worthwhile and doesn't really matter in the end.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a good way to go through life operating out of fear. Nothing exciting in the world gets done that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. Cool. Well, so you learned how to code, you built some, stuff for the iPhone, you built this app. You're at Stanford, and this, these templates that you built for friends and family end up sort of becoming a website and a company. How do you navigate going from, being a full-time student working on this little thing on the side to actually making the decision to drop out and pursue this full time?
So of course, being at Stanford, having this app that blows up, it's very close to Sand Hill Road, and the VCs were already reaching out. And there was one VC, I believe he actually used it for his own parking ticket. and he was a partner at the Andreessen Horowitz, and so he passed it along to his partners there. And then one day I'm browsing Twitter and I get a DM, and it's actually from Mark Andreessen, and he says, "Do you want to grab breakfast?" And this was like really exciting for me because I was fresh off the boat from the UK, and all of a sudden I was going to this one-on-one breakfast. So I showed up at the breakfast, and really that conversation helped me clarify how I can turn this exciting project that a lot of people were using into a company. And I was very clear with any VC trying to invest with DoNotPay that it was my dream come true to go to Stanford, and I couldn't just drop out 2 months in to start a company, because that would be a waste of the dream. And so I said, if you want to invest in DoNotPay, you can, but you have to let me work on it while in school. And this created a really interesting dynamic, because a lot of startups, they raise their seed funding, and 6 months later, they're off to the races, grow like 10x. But with me, I'd raised this 1 million from Andreessen Horowitz, and I basically didn't touch the money. And I just looked very carefully at the space and why this startup idea hadn't succeeded in the past. I think for any business, the question is, why now? Why hasn't it worked before? And in my case, the idea of an app that helps you fight for your rights seems obvious. But the reason it didn't work is because there were all these companies just as point solutions. So there was a company called Fixed, which helped with parking tickets. There was another company called Service, which helped with delayed flights. A third company called Cushion that did bank fees. But the problem is, unless you're a bad driver like me, the average American only gets a ticket once a year. And so it's very difficult to build a retentive business around that. And so with DoNotPay, I knew if I wanted to be successful, I would have to make it horizontal. And that's why I took it so slowly. I ultimately did drop out 3 years later, but didn't drop out at the beginning.
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, understand, the argument for, having to drive on the other side of the road and everything, but to be fair, I don't think this really applies for parking tickets, because it's just parking. But I will give it to you that I always find those parking signs to be incredibly hard to read. Like I consider myself like a reasonably bright person, and like whenever you're parking, there's like at least 3 different signs with like different messages and different hours where things are closed. And I'm like, if I can't figure this out like very quickly, I don't know who is. And so I just end up sort of guessing and taking a parking spot and hoping for the best. But I'm curious, that initial breakfast with Mark, do you remember anything in particular about that, other than sort of this expanding of the vision to go from what you had at the time to maybe building a broader company?
I think the biggest thing is aligning your business model with the user. So this was at the time when Facebook was just being destroyed in the media for ads and selling data. I think now they're on an upswing. And so it was pretty clear from that breakfast that we would have to make it a subscription model where we work for our users. And the only way we could do that is by building out all of these bots. And Mark and Andreessen Horowitz have been amazing. They said that we're very patient. You can take as long as you need to actually build out the product before launching the subscription. Don't worry about launching in 3 weeks. It's better to actually get it right. And I think that patience allowed me to actually build a product that is successful when there was a graveyard of competitors before.
Right. And you actually didn't charge for like years, I think, after you first built the product. Is that right?
That's right. And I felt like we would make it free, we'd build up customer love, and then eventually, once we had enough, we would be able to make a subscription.
So what was like the unlock where you decided like, okay, we're in a comfortable place now. It's not just parking tickets anymore. It's this, and that. And we can now feel, good about charging a monthly subscription or a bi-monthly subscription, and, be able to have users feel like they're getting a lot of value out of that.
So it was in 2019, we'd reached about 50 use cases, and we felt like with 50 use cases, we're going to charge $3 a month. And $3 a month is the bare minimum that a company can charge without it being a joke. There are some companies that might charge $1, but maybe they're testing people's willingness to pay. But $3 a month, it could be a real business. And so that's the pricing we came up with. And since then, we've added a lot more use cases, improved the technology, and now it's actually $18 a month. So I think at the 50 use case point, we felt like we had just enough to start charging where it's not a joke.
Right. And I don't know if there's anything sort of behind this, but at least as far as I could tell, you guys are actually charging $36 every 2 months as opposed to $18 a month. I've
Yeah.
like never really heard of bi-monthly charging. Like, monthly is obviously very popular and then annually as well. And sometimes there's like a discount on the annual. Why bi-monthly?
For us, it's very unique. So consumers typically see success about 30 business days. If you think about some of these corporations and governments, they're operating in the Stone Ages. And so we want a consumer to have a big success before the next renewal. And that's why we do bi-monthly. And it takes about 60 days is a nice, safe margin of error.
Yeah, that makes sense. And have you considered any other business models like, sticking with aligning with the user, but maybe tweaking things here and there somehow where maybe you're making a percentage off of what you save users or something slightly different than what you've done to date?
We're always exploring new things, but on the percentage save front, some of our competitors actually did this. They would say, oh, I've canceled your Equinox membership. Equinox is 300 a month. So I've saved you 3,000 a year, and I'm going to charge you $900 for canceling your Equinox. And that's not very consumer friendly. And so some of these use cases, technically there's a dollar saved amount, but really it's about the time savings. And if you apply these big percentages to the dollar saved, it's actually not very consumer friendly. Now, there are some cases where we think it could work, maybe getting compensation for robo-coolers, where we've built a great product around that. And we are thinking of experimenting with that, but that's why we haven't done it more broadly, because there's actually been a lot of complaints against some of our competitors for charging these huge amounts just to cancel a subscription or jump through a hoop where it's not necessarily saving them money.
What is this robocallers product that you mentioned?
So it's called Robo Revenge, and there's this amazing law in America. It's called the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, and it means you can get $1,500 every time you get a spam call under this law. And it's very difficult to get, though, because the spammers who call you, they're not giving their real names, they're using spoof numbers and all of this stuff. And so we were thinking at DoNotPay, how can we get this money for people? And so what we did is we built a trap. And the way the trap works is when they phone you up and they try and sell you something, you can give them a DoNotPay credit card. And through the payment network, they try and run the transaction and the card declines. But when it declines, it gets their business name, phone number, address, and it uses all of those details to generate a demand letter to get this compensation. So it's really innovative, and it's using the scammer's own technology against them when they try and sell you something.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like these sorts of scams are going to only sort of increase in prevalence, but you've built this like sort of defense mechanism, and hopefully the defense mechanisms also sort of increase at least as fast as the sort of offensive things that the scammers are using. I pay a lot of attention to crypto. Generally, I'm very excited about it for a large part because of sort of these like sort of human rights, category of things that you've mentioned, and helping people to like sort of do things outside of, big corporations and things like this. I feel like it's like sort of generally on theme. But, one thing about crypto that it gets sort of a bad rep for is, for example, if one of these, callers were to charge in crypto, it might be like sort of more difficult to trace. They wouldn't have to give like their name and their KYC necessarily to collect payment. Is that something that you've thought about at all for like the robocallers or otherwise? Does crypto sort of intersect with your business in any way?
I think everyone who's using crypto is so sophisticated that they're not our target demographic. We're really helping people in middle America who barely can use the internet. And that's our target demographic. But we should consider doing more in crypto.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the team that you've built, it's really interesting. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but last I heard you had like 7 employees. And I think maybe you have some similar number of contractors as well, but like very small company, at least like 250,000 users subscribe to DoNotPay. So it's like, it's not 7 people running this like small business. It's 7 people catering to 250,000 people. And I think it's really interesting. I've heard you talk about on other podcasts where, there's companies like you're using some of the same examples actually that I've used in talking about how I think in the future there'll be these big companies built by very few people, potentially even one person. And the classic examples I point to are like WhatsApp and Instagram. Both were acquired for billions of dollars, both coincidentally by Facebook. And I think Instagram, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I feel like Instagram had maybe even less than a dozen employees at the time when they were acquired for $1 billion, and WhatsApp was maybe 20 or 30 employees when they were acquired for tens of billions, something like roughly on that order. So what was like sort of your framework from day one, or like, I guess, why have you built out this company in a pretty different way where most people are trying to scale their employees much faster as their product gets bigger and the number of customers that they're serving gets a lot larger?
So I'll talk about why I did this from the beginning, and then I'll talk about what's changed with AI. So yes, you're right. So we have 7 employees, 7 contractors, and around 250,000 customers. And so every full-time employee is responsible for more than 10,000 people. So back when I started, I think coming from the UK into the Silicon Valley bubble, I've always tried to focus on substance and a real business. And it seemed to me that some startup founders were playing the game of being a startup founder rather than actually trying to build a real business. So oftentimes, and I do some angel investing as well, and I just noticed some of my friends or some people in the community, they would say that progress is actually hiring people. So instead of actually getting customers or growing the business, they would say, oh, we hired so-and-so from Stripe or something like that. And that's really exciting and great, but building a big organization needs to be supported by a big business. And so I always ask myself, is this person that I'm hiring really going to move the needle? And with consumer, the inputs and the outputs don't correlate. With enterprise, it's a bit different, where you need to hire all these expensive salespeople and account managers. But consumer, it's just software, as long as you're doing something automated. And so we just haven't had a need to hire all these people because we just need engineers to build the product. Now with AI, it's even more the case where you can automate as much as possible with AI. There's a company called Klarna, the buy now, pay later company, that automated over 60% of their customer service workload. Midjourney, I think, has under 25 employees. And so for consumer best in class, it's really something where we want to be.
Right. And what was the history of this organizational growth in terms of employees? Like, what was the first hire you made and why did you need to make that? And then for each subsequent hire, was there like a big pressing need at each time, or you just ran into someone who you were like, I have to work with this person? With only 7 people, full-time employees, each one is sort of like very important in a way. So I'm curious how you actually went about each of those hires.
My first hire was someone called Alex Benega, who's an amazing designer. Obviously, I built the first version of DoNotPay from an engineering standpoint, but it looked terrible. There was like this moving gradient in the background that would actually give you a headache if you use the website. And so just from a necessity standpoint, I needed to upgrade the design very quickly. And then beyond that, I just hired my smart Stanford engineering friends. From a hiring perspective, I've always focused on missionary versus mercenary. So I love to hire the type of people that browse Reddit at 2 a.m. looking for ways to fight these big companies and governments. And both Alex and the first 3 hires of DoNotPay are actually still with the company many years later. So that gives you an idea of just how motivated everyone is by the mission. And obviously it's great. We treat our employees very well. We pay dividends and things like that to them. But it's really important that everyone is here for the right reasons.
And have you stayed focused in Silicon Valley area, or have you hired globally, especially in the last 3 or 4 years since COVID hit? What's your guys' focus in terms of like geographical location, working together, working remotely, stuff like that?
We're like a pod. I'm a big believer in in-person work, so we all just travel around and work in person. Right now, we're in San Francisco.
So you guys are actually moving, like even though you're working in person all the time, you might take time. Is it like weeks or months or even years where you'll go to some other location and be based out of there for a while?
Exactly.
So what's like an example of that? Like, have you actually been in another country or another major city for like over a year as a team?
Yeah, so during COVID, we still didn't remote work. We actually all went to Cape Town and we all worked in person in Cape Town because there were fewer COVID restrictions there, and we would just work in person and travel around even during COVID.
And do any of the other employees have like families or significant others or anything like that that makes that a little more challenging, or you're able to just make it work?
Right now, I think the average age of the team is like 24, so we're all in on the mission. We do have some employees on the operation side who have families and based in Canada. So we're flexible, but the core engineering product team is really in person.
Makes sense. And I'm curious, like that time in Cape Town or anywhere else that you've been outside of like San Francisco, are there pros and cons to these different places where obviously there's a lot of benefits to being in San Francisco, especially when you're building with AI, but do these other places offer sort of unexpected benefits from working from there?
Well, nothing compares to San Francisco, and I don't think it's just the AI. I think I've said this before, but it's such a boring place that you can actually meet anyone if you're mildly interesting, and you can walk down the street and bump into even Sam Altman. And I don't think people realize in New York or London it's very stratified, but in San Francisco anyone is really willing to meet you and help you, and I think nothing beats the Bay Area.
Right. So speaking of Sam, obviously OpenAI has been at the forefront of a lot of the AI development over the last I don't know, a couple of years or so, and longer than that, but in terms of stuff that consumers could use with the launch of ChatGPT and everything like that. So when you guys started, I mean, this was like almost 10 years ago now, and you were more so like just building these templates and then over time sort of building in some AI, but nothing as advanced as what we have now with like GPT 3 and then 4 and then 4.0. What's it been like? Have you sort of had to rejigger the back end pretty fundamentally to incorporate some of this more advanced AI? Like what has that led to in terms of changes with what you guys are doing?
So when we started, it was pure templates. And the problem with a template is it's not synchronous. So a company or a government could respond, and then you would either need another template to respond to their response, or you wouldn't be able to do anything. And that really limited the disputes we could handle. So maybe a template would be good for a parking ticket, but it wouldn't necessarily be good for a medical bill or something more sophisticated. And so everything really changed for us when GPT-3 launched. And that meant GPT-3 was just good enough to hold a conversation with a big company. And so we began to ask the question internally of what things do companies make you jump through hoops to hold a conversation? And one example of that is canceling a subscription. You think of some magazine subscriptions like New York Times, where they make you log in and chat with the New York Times just to cancel the subscription. And the agent on the other end is trying to gaslight you into not canceling. So they're saying, do you want a discount? Are you sure? We got some great articles coming up, all of this stuff. And so the first AI product that we had was GPT-3 AI to cancel subscriptions. And that worked really well and it continues to work, but it doesn't really move the needle that much. And GPT-3 didn't reason enough to do more sophisticated use cases. In the legal context, it would actually mix up the person suing, the plaintiff, and the defendant. And so you can't have that for more sophisticated stuff. But then GPT-4 came out, and we felt that finally it was more sophisticated to actually do some negotiations. So we deployed it with things like AI bill negotiation, where it would log into someone's Comcast account and start chatting with Comcast to negotiate someone's bill. And what's interesting is these big companies started using AI as well. And so we had some cases where our AI was talking to their AI, and the two AIs would battle it out. And we like to think we're more motivated. And so our AIs tend to win over their AIs the majority of the time. And GPT-4 was like a night and day difference at doing this. We actually tried this with GPT-3, and Comcast or whoever would say, okay, fine, I'll give you $20 off your internet bill. And GPT-3 would say, okay, I accept. But GPT-4 says, no, I want $100 or I'm canceling right now. And it would really be forceful in getting its outcome. So that was all great, and that's working really well. But the final problem we had was not all of this stuff is done online. To actually accomplish a lot in the real world, you still have to use your phone. And a lot of companies require you to actually call them up to get something serious done. And GPT-4, the latency would be too high. It's about 2.8 seconds, give or take. And so finally, that problem has now been solved in the past few weeks with GPT-4o, where they've drastically reduced the latency. And so we are on the verge in the next few weeks of releasing voice bots that will, if you can imagine you losing your bag, it will phone up United Airlines baggage service and track down your bag for you. And so that's the kind of arc of AI progression. And it's really exciting. It feels like we're making years of progress every few months as these models are released.
Yeah, are there any sort of outstanding problems? Like you mentioned, GPT-3 could, do some things, but it couldn't really negotiate, and then GPT-4 could negotiate, but it couldn't really do the voice calls, and now GPT-4o can do that. Is there like sort of a next sort of line of problems that you're hoping to be solved by further, incremental versions of AI, or is this sort of substantially what you need to be able to do a lot of what you want to do with DoNotPay?
I think a lot of work has to be done on the agent side. So there's Auto GPT, but that's generally regarded as a joke. It's not very useful. And so I think GPT-4 X or GPT-5, I hope they build some really good agents that can click on people's behalf. Because large language models are really useless unless you can connect it to the real world. And we've done that with we connected it to the postal service, to the phones, but we really need to connect it to the web where it can actually do sophisticated clicking.
Right. And so given that you guys are, leveraging GPT in a lot of ways, is there any concern that like while it is a more general purpose AI and LLM, that it's going to potentially offer a way that sort of overnight disrupts what DoNotPay is doing, or is too much of what you guys have done sort of making it custom built for the use case and to make it easy for the customer? So it's in a way like even if a general purpose AI could do these things, the person, or the user sort of engaging with them doesn't really know the right thing to ask, doesn't really know like sort of the right way to go about things. Are there advantages there?
I think there's an aspect on the integration front, but we're very humble and these companies have billions and billions of dollars. So I'm sure they could do what we're doing. But I think it's a more fundamental reason why we don't have to worry, which is I think that there are two types of AIs. There's positive sum AI and adversarial AI. So positive sum AI, if you imagine AI that helps you book a flight ticket, it's positive sum because the consumer is benefiting because they get their flight ticket booked by the AI, and the airline is benefiting because they get revenue from the ticket booking. And so that's great. But then there's adversarial AI where the AI is trying to do something for you that's against the interests of the receiving party. And so canceling a subscription, negotiating a bill, getting your hospital bill wiped out are all examples of that. And you look at all of these demos from these big companies, and it's always positive sum use cases. And I think that's because that's where the incentives lie. Comcast is not going to build an AI that cancels their own memberships. And so because of that, and even Google is not going to build that because Comcast is probably one of their biggest advertisers. And it's probably also beneath them to start upsetting these big companies and governments. They have a lot bigger issues to worry about. And so this kind of difference in incentives creates room for a new company that's independent and fights for consumer rights.
Right. And so I guess you've alluded to it with, the general mission being fighting for human rights. But to your point, it's like people generally like to hear the term like positive sum and be a part of things that are positive sum versus adversarial sort of as like a negative connotation. What makes you comfortable sort of like operating in that realm and feeling good about what you're doing in that realm?
I think the unfortunate reality is whenever there's an exciting new technology, it's being used by the big companies and governments to exploit people and rip them off, and criminals too. So even with AI, pharmacies are now using AI to discriminate against people. Criminals, which you alluded to, use AI to trick people into giving up their crypto or life savings with fake voices. And similarly, even airlines are using AI to charge fees and charge people more money for tickets based on how much you can pay. And so consumers really need something to fight back. And the only way you can fight back is fight fire with fire. And I think someone has to build the consumer tools, and hopefully it can be us to do that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And in terms of AI more broadly, like outside of the context of DoNotPay or even, GPT on its own, my understanding of your perspective is that a lot of the sort of like AGI, speculation, whether it's for good or for bad, and, whether people want that to exist sooner or later or never, that a lot of that is sort of currently maybe unfounded, or at least unfounded in the sense that, the current technologies and models that we have, while advancing, very fast, as we alluded to, with like the difference between ChatGPT, or rather GPT-3 and 4 and 4.0, that those advances, while impressive, are not actually going to bring us to a place of AGI. Can you sort of elaborate on your general perspective for where AI is, where it's going, and how far down the line, or what might be required for something like on par with an AGI to actually exist?
So my view is the way the transformer architecture is set up, it's a very, very advanced statistical model where it's predicting the next word that will come next. And that's really, really useful for a lot of things, including negotiating bills, but it's not super intelligent. And you ask ChatGPT to add up numbers, and oftentimes it gets the answer wrong. And that speaks to the fact that it's not really reasoning, it's more just predicting what will come next. And so I think we're going to have a fundamentally new technical breakthrough beyond the transformer architecture to achieve superintelligence. And there's an open question as to whether we'll get there or not. I'm confident that eventually we will, because so much money is being thrown at the space and the smartest engineers are working on these problems. But it's not like, oh, they just need to feed more inputs into the model, add more compute to train a bigger model, and it will get us to AGI. There has to be an almost scientific discovery. And I'm a very optimistic person about the future, but it's not like it's around the corner.
Right. And so just speculating here, not obviously expecting any like sort of definitive answer or anything like that, but maybe in terms of like probabilistic terms or something, where would you anticipate that next breakthrough to come from? Would it come from a Google or a Facebook? Would it come from an OpenAI? Would it come from a startup that's sort of established already to some degree like yours? Or would it come from, some random guy in his dorm room, 17, 18-year-old, something like that?
I think it might unfortunately come from China. I think that the regulators here are really trying to hold back AI development, and I worry that it could actually come from China. Maybe an open source project there, or a big company there.
Interesting. And is that worrisome to you?
I think so. I've seen. I might have a theory that America is going to collapse with new laws. I think it's a widely held theory among a lot of people, where every year they just pass new laws and new regulations, and it really holds people back.
Yeah, I think one of the prevailing theories around regulation is that it's sort of um, it's presented as protecting consumers or small companies and innovation, but in reality, it's sort of protecting the incumbents, who are sort of working hand in hand with government in a lot of cases to get these regulations through. Is that something, is that a perspective that you share?
Yes, it really just hold backs innovation. And although it only applies to the biggest companies, it applies to them because they have the resources to hire all of these lawyers, and smaller companies might not have those resources.
Right. And so one of the interesting things that you've done, switching gears a little bit from AI, is sort of twofold when it comes to the finances of DoNotPay. I mean, first of all, you raised a large round, I think it was a couple years ago now. So you've got plenty of money in the bank. The company is also profitable, so you don't even need to dip into these raised funds if you don't want to, and you can just use them for growth or whatever it might be, or put them away in the bank and use them when you need them. but I understand you've sort of embraced this sort of do not pay lifestyle from day one, where like your consumers, you're not trying to spend money where you don't need to, and it's you run it relatively frugally. And even, that's on the cost side, but even on the revenue side, like you said, you started by charging $3 a month. So everything's sort of been like very conservative in terms of what you're charging, what you're spending, 7 employees, like we've talked about some of these things. And then now the latest thing that you've done is, I think just maybe a month ago or so, earlier this year, you guys issued the first dividend back to some of your earliest investors, and more generally anyone who has a stake in DoNotPay. I think you guys did $1 million dividend. What was the story behind that? Why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, it was actually more than 1 million. We've always embraced the do not pay lifestyle. So just to give you a concrete example, no one at DoNotPay has a physical company credit card. Obviously, we have virtual ramp cards to use with AWS and things, but we've never had a physical company credit card. And that's just one of many examples of how we're frugal. I think that we have a great business. We have all these subscribers and a very small team, and so we're fortunate to have had more money than we've raised. We've raised 24 million in total, and we have more than that. And so we were really thinking, what can we do with this excess money? And we're obviously investing in product. We're actually considering acquiring a few companies. But we also recognize that in this climate of high interest rates, employees and investors want some liquidity. And it's no surprise that Google, Facebook, and I think even Amazon now are all paying dividends, where at least Google and Facebook never paid, or Google and Meta, I should say, never paid a dividend before this year. And so it's really a sign of the times where people are fed up of these money-losing companies, and they want some liquidity. And we thought it would be a nice bonus both for our employees and our investors to make that happen.
Yeah, so a couple of questions going off of that. Thinking of which one is better to go to first, but I guess there's this common sort of idea that once a company starts, stockpiling cash or distributing dividends, it's like a sign that they don't know what next to invest in. This, approach that you're taking, as well as, like you mentioned, many others, Meta, Amazon, I think it's pretty clear that both of those companies are still, working very hard to innovate in a lot of different ways. What do you think sort of that perspective gets wrong in some ways?
I think it's a myth of the past few years of zero interest rates that growth and profitability are mutually exclusive. You look at actually Facebook, not many people know this, but at the Series A, they were actually profitable. And so it was a good business from the very beginning. And then you've had this latest generation of companies that have never made a profit. And that's kind of created this illusion that you should just keep burning money to be successful, but really you should focus on the business. And actually the biggest companies of our time are Facebook's and Amazon's, and even Microsoft. They raise very little money and were very profitable. So I think it's only a recent illusion that this has happened.
Yeah, and so my other question was on, you mentioned, maybe considering some acquisitions. I'm curious, sort of from a high level, what your acquisition strategy might be, or like types of companies you would look at. And then sort of secondarily to that, it might be challenging given your sort of company's culture, 7 employees. Like a lot of companies might go and try to make like an acqui-hire and, bring a lot of talented people on board. But it strikes me that would not really be your priority. Your priority would to bring in like interesting software or consumer bases or something like that. So what's like the challenge in thinking about an acquisition when you come from this company history of having, less than 10 people as a part of the company?
So we're trying to be the Costco of consumer rights. So you have one subscription and then you get everything included. And there's only so much that our team can build. And we're thinking, well, maybe we can expand it to entirely new product segments. So one example is actually DMV test prep. Ironically, the largest DMV test prep company in the US is actually a Canadian company. So the Canadians are telling the Americans how to prep for their driving tests. And so I think things like that would be very interesting for us. Things where it's a really good product, but either the business model or the cap table is just broken, and it would be a nice addition for our subscribers, but maybe it's not a good standalone business.
Is there anything else that you're thinking about, with all this money in the bank that like you're saving it for something, or there's a certain sort of lever that you might like to invest in for the business in either the near term or the long term?
We are really focusing on content right now. Initially, we got a lot of our customers from SEO. But in my opinion, SEO is a dying acquisition channel. The world moves very slowly, but the writing is on the wall. People are just going to ask the AI assistants like Perplexity the answers to questions. They're not going to Google questions. So we moved away from SEO a few years ago, and we've been focused on organic social. And we actually have views with like videos with like hundreds of millions of views now. And so we're promoting like really good content and that helps people with their consumer rights issues.
Would you be generally like bearish on Google given their dependency on search? If you're bearish on SEO and these things, is that something where you don't see a positive future for Google, or could it go one way or another depending on, how they develop their AI and things like that?
Google have an innovator's dilemma where they can't build an AI assistant to answer all the questions because that would ruin their ads business. And Google are doing these great demos where the AI is answering all the questions. But I go on Google right now and it seems like it's the same old user experience as it was a year ago. And so because of that, I think they're at risk. But I do have this maxim in business and for myself that the more things change, the more things stay the same. And I think it will take a really long time for the world to change in any sort of aspect. And it's not like it's going away overnight. Even IBM still exists. And so I think that the growth story is ruined, but maybe it will take decades to actually hit it hard.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess to your maxim, do you have any sort of I guess I don't know if doubt is the right word, but do you give any sort of credit to this idea that, maybe with like, AI fast progressing and things like this, that the world could actually start to, advance much more quickly than we're sort of accustomed to, even as we've seen, within the confines of like information technology, things have really exploded over the last couple of decades or whatever it might be, maybe even a little longer than that. But in the physical world, things kind of, to your point, look kind of the same in a lot of ways. Do you think that there's a chance that things start developing much more quickly than they have, or you mostly see sort of continuation of the past in terms of like the pace of innovation?
You need a big shock to the system beyond a technical breakthrough to inspire real change. And so I like to think COVID actually moved the legal system forward by decades. One concrete example is DoNotPay helps people file 83B elections, which is a tax form that startup founders have to file and mail signed return receipt requested to the IRS. And before COVID, the IRS said that only if you have a wet signature can you file this document. But then when COVID hit, they said, okay, you can e-sign the documents, which allow a company like DoNotPay to automate this on behalf of people. And that change has stayed even though COVID has ended. And so you need these big shocks out of necessity. And sometimes it could be a disease or a war, or maybe just things are collapsing, like with Flexport in Long Beach, like people weren't getting their shipping on time, and so they had to change it. And so if there's a big shock, then it will move things forward much more than a technical breakthrough.
Right. And so you mentioned, Flexport, and also earlier that you've done some angel investing. Obviously, you're super attuned to AI, and generally, I think you like sort of these quote unquote boring software businesses that are just helping real people, do real things, save money, save time, along sort of the ethos of do not pay. But is there anything else in sort of, the general landscape that you're really excited about, that founders are working on?
I'm not excited about AI, pure AI first, AI only companies. And I'm seeing a huge amount of jargon. It's like we're building explainability for AI models and all of this stuff. And I'm thinking, what does that even mean? So to your point, I'm really excited about regular businesses that are using AI to improve the existing product. Obviously, I'm biased, but almost like DoNotPay, where there's a great business that works that you can bring in AI and make it more exciting. Personally, I also invest in high school and college dropouts. That's probably 75% of my angel portfolio. I was fortunate to take the Thiel Fellowship, and I've interviewed a lot of future Thiel Fellows. And I think that's where the future is. And the reason for that is if you have a Apple engineer that raises money, that's worked at Apple in the management team for many years, the first thing they'll do is they'll hire a huge number of people. But if you have a college dropout that starts a business, the first thing they'll do is build the product, and they have everything to lose, and so they're much more scrappy. And you see this today with all these bloated AI companies that have raised hundreds of millions and now have very little revenue or very little customer adoption, whereas a college dropout or high school dropout would approach the problem very differently.
What do you think it was about the Thiel Fellowship for you personally? Like, what was most impactful? Was it the network that it sort of opened for you, or the money itself, or the belief from this institution that you could go and build a great company? Some combination of the few. I'm curious, like which leg, or maybe it was something that I didn't even mention, felt like it was moved the needle the most for you as someone who did ultimately decide to drop out and go pursue that.
Stanford is an amazing place. However, surprisingly, the vast majority of Stanford students actually want to go work for Google or Facebook, or be consultants, or I suppose in this day and age, maybe actually be VCs. And that's like one of the top tier institutions in the US. And so that wasn't what I aligned with. I wanted to be a builder. And so for me, the biggest value was the network, having 20 other people that were really focused on building something that changed society in one way or another.
Cool. Well, I know we're coming up on time, and I appreciate you taking all the time. Last question for you is, you've been working on DoNotPay, maybe not since it was like officially incorporated, but in general, you've been working on it for almost 10 years now, I think. Are you going to be working on it for another 10 years? And if you are, what's in store for as much as you can see for the future? Maybe some acquisitions, maybe some new product lines, but if you can paint a picture of the future, or the picture that you paint for the other missionaries on your team, what does that look like?
I see DoNotPay as my life's work, so I'm going to continue working on it for the foreseeable future. I have a friend who just sold his company after 30 years, and I hope that will be me, but even longer. DoNotPay is going from proactive, so where someone comes to us and says, I got a parking ticket, can you help me? To retroactive, where the AI is like sitting on your shoulder, finding ways to save you money. And that's really the product we're trying to build. And we're constantly launching features around that. And so wouldn't it be nice if you just wake up one day and the AI says, I saved you $50 while you're sleeping? And so that's my ultimate goal with the business.
That would be nice. Well, anyway, thank you for taking the time again. I really appreciate it and enjoyed the conversation. Last question, I guess, is for people who want to follow you and follow DoNotPay. What's the best place to send them?
On Twitter at jbrowder1 or Joshua Browder, and donotpay.com.